Thank you for listening to the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. We want to welcome you back to another episode and another podcast with us. And
we've got a great one this week because we're following up with our special guests, Leah and Kris.
Hello.
Hello.
So welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate you sharing the way that you are so openly and vulnerably. And I know that your story is going to bless so many people.
And there's so much of it that we knew we wouldn't be able to do it in one and maybe more podcasts. And we'll see how many.
We'll see how we go.
Yeah. But if you missed last week's podcast, I encourage you to maybe pause here and go listen to last week so that you know where you're at and know what's going on, and listen to the first part of Leah and Kris's story.
So we're talking about Leah's testimony, and we got up to the point where you and Kris met.
Yes, and this is the part where my story and my journey really becomes our journey. Kris has very much walked not planned. He definitely didn't plan to walk such a journey. I remember a few years into my recovery journey, he walked out of the bathroom one day and he's like, "This is not what I signed up for." And he really didn't. He really didn't sign up for what he was faced with. So I'm just so grateful that he has hung in to the wild ride of, gripping on with both hands. So it's at this stage that Kris and I met.
Was that at church?
It was at church.
You
go. Yeah.
Just briefly, I grew up in the Northern Territory and moved down here year 2000, 6 months after the millennium bug wiped out civilization. And
It's supposed to.
yes, we came back from the Stone Age. And so there was a gentleman down here attending church, and he had actually worked, and we lived in the same town, and he had led me to Jesus during my apprenticeship. I was raised Roman Catholic and then went to a Marist Brothers boarding school, and always felt there was meant to be more. And I had these questions, and in my apprenticeship, I encountered this gentleman. He, over, 12, 18 months, he led me to Jesus. And for a time there, I went to the church in our town, but then I stopped going, and then eventually moved down to Brisbane year 2000 and was here for, a few months, a number of months. But I called him up and said, I want to come to church. And he said, "Great, I've been waiting for your phone call. Took you long enough." And went to church. And at the time I was doing shift work, and I was on my days off. I didn't really have anywhere to go, didn't really have a social network, so to speak. So I would often, he would work at the church, so I would come in on my days off and work at the church. And yes, that's where I encountered this green-eyed brunette.
Don't say it like you knew what you had when we first met.
No, I didn't.
He was interested in someone else, and I was telling him how to date her because I knew her. So I was giving him tips on dating someone else, but God had other plans.
So you started dating, and when did...
No.
We didn't actually date. No. We discovered, it was funny because I had a TV and he didn't have a TV. And
my TV
he had a washing
broken,
machine.
and her washing machine had broken.
No, I had given my washing machine to a family who didn't have one. So I had no washing machine, he had no TV, and we were working together. So we joked that our relationship was based on electrical appliances because he would come over and sit and have a cup of tea on my sofa and watch TV, and I would go and wash my clothes at his house. But we weren't dating. We just worked together and we got along really well and made each other laugh really well.
And at some point, I can't remember exactly where or even why, but I remember just a short, simple prayer or request to God, show me someone beautiful, or show me who you see as, she is beautiful. And I just opening myself up for that. And whether it was the same day or it wasn't that long after that, I walked through the creche door. We had services in the morning and at night. And Leah was also, she ran the children's ministry, but also the creche. So during, you never saw her during the service. She was always looking after, she had like 30 kids from like young teens to babies. Like no one ever heard them. There were no parents in there. Like she had them just like so well behaved and controlled and just taken care of. And at the end of all of the church, I remember walking through the door and she was just standing up the back near a desk, and she was just standing like kind of like just looking away, and she was brushing her hair, and I just got stuck in the moment, and there was just a realization, wow, she really is like beautiful, not a worldly way, whatever you want to say. It was just like she really is.
He makes it sound like I'm an ogre out of Shrek.
Not at all.
So
No, it was more an education for me. So like to look beyond the surface, and what I was looking for was never going to be not enough, but it was never going to be the right thing.
And it's not what he needed. He needed somebody to challenge him. That's what I tell myself.
yeah. And he's gotten that challenge.
Absolutely, he has. But we never dated. I remember we had a big fight one day. We had a disagreement, and I just said to him, you go and date whoever you want, but you'll be back for me because nobody else gets you and makes you laugh like I do. And he came to the office the next day, and the thing he's talking about with watching me brush my hair was like 2 or 3 months prior to that. He'd never said a word. So he comes to me the next day in the office after we'd had a big fight, and he goes, yeah, I know, I'm meant to marry you. Like, what is it with you guys? Like, why wait 2 or 3 months? In all my frustration. So we knew from that day we were meant to be married. We'd never dated. So we basically left the building holding hands, knowing that we were meant to be together. Our parents had never heard of the other person.
Freaked out our pastor because and some of the stuff, but mainly him, had joked about us getting married, but he seriously was joking. He wasn't believing it would happen or not. Then when it actually did become like official, he took several steps backwards. He was very taken aback, sort of thing.
So in all of this time, how's your spiritual life going?
Well, this is where things really actually started to get quite chaotic, because it's like Eric asked before, when did you know? I never knew. I never knew that was my childhood. There was always things involved, but I never knew. And even now at this point, you'd think, well, how do you not know? But once we had made a commitment to get married, and we pretty much got engaged right then and there, said, we know we're going to get married.
At some point I gave her a ring made out of a Bundaberg ginger beer bottle.
That was my first engagement ring.
Like how long in before?
It was almost straight away. I think it was that night or the next day. So we were officially engaged by ginger beer.
Bundaberg
ginger beer.
Classy.
Best, not sponsored by, but the
and
best
it was
ginger
months
beer.
and months before I got a proper engagement ring, but we knew we were meant to be together. But from that point, it's like things really amped up, because I had now made a commitment for us to be married.
I think on the day that I gave you the actual engagement ring, you cut yourself.
Yeah, I hadn't done that for a long time, but I remember I really struggled with that.
You locked yourself in my bathroom,
yeah.
And then when you come out, you were looking down and disconnected, and you'd said that you cut yourself. During our engagement, she called off the engagement like 7 times.
No, it was, you're so gracious. It was actually almost once a month. We were engaged for 14 months. So it was actually almost once a month I called off the wedding.
Very, very cold, indifferent.
I'm not doing this.
I don't need you.
Yeah, that was it. Is I don't need you. I don't want a part of you in my life. Like, it was very. I don't know how he stayed in that 14 months. Actually, it was crazy, and yet we still kept on resolving.
And you tried jumping out of the car while we were driving down the freeway.
So you did know what you were getting into.
kind of. But then at that point, I became more aware of the spiritual influence in my life, because I lived alone in my own apartment. And I remember I would come home and there was a dark figure that would stand in the corner of my apartment. And I would try addressing it, and it just wouldn't interact with me. It would stay. And at first I was fearful, but then I just got used to it. Like sometimes it was there, sometimes.
As you do, as most people. You know.
But sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. And it just was like, okay, this is my life now, is this figure is here. You know, it was a very large, dominant kind of figure. And we kept on going with, you know, talking wedding and meeting each other's families and all that kind of thing. But then I can't even remember what the instigator of it was, but I think we'd been together that day, but then he'd gone to his house, I'd gone to mine, and I was lying in my bed, and just all of a sudden I could just feel, it's like I was lying there and then boom, there it is. It's the demonic in physical form breathing in my face, like actually had me pinned down by both shoulders and was breathing like hot air into my face. And the only way I can describe it was really like almost like a warthog, like just breathing and just holding me down with such force. And it absolutely petrified me. It's the first time I'd ever had it happened out of nowhere, just lying there in my bed. I just absolutely freaked out. Like I quickly jumped up, got dressed. Once again, had no family that I could fall back on, didn't really have friends that I could go to for support, drove to Chris's house, and I ended up staying at his house for like 3 days. Like I just was so afraid to return to my apartment. And that was really telling because at one point there, Kris tried addressing whatever was going on, and the demonic actually spoke directly to him, kind of bypassed me.
Fun. Yeah, that was fun.
Bypassed me and directly spoke to him while he was trying to have a conversation with me.
I can't remember what led up to it, but I do remember like Leah was on her bed, and it's I think what you call like a studio apartment where you can see everything.
Everything's open.
And I was just sitting on the edge of the bed, and obviously we had been talking or something, and I don't know if I got the sense that there was like a disconnect or something, but it just said, you know, I can kill her, don't you?
And like back away.
Could you see it, or you just
no? This was Leah. Well, no,
okay.
this was
speaking
not,
through her.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. This wasn't like I never saw a shadowy figure or anything like that. Yeah, and I can't remember what exactly led up to it. You know, the hairs on the back of my neck. Yeah, it was kind of like the Sixth Sense. The hairs on the back of my neck went, bring, and thankfully.
And what do you say? Okay. Like, how do you respond to that?
Like I don't know where it came from, but I just like I addressed her, I addressed it, and I just said, no, you can't, or no, you won't. And I didn't, slam Bibles on her forehead or like,
Thank goodness.
Well, that's how some people think deliverance is done.
We're going to drive it out by, pushing a Bible really hard on them because, the thick paper word of God is going to drive the thing out. I didn't do anything, but I just said, no, you can't, or no, you won't. And I didn't, not in the name of Jesus. No, I just said, no, you can't, or no, you won't. And I knew then, okay, this is serious. And there were other indicators too. If I touched Leah, on the cheek or,
like your beard. His beard.
If I had stubble, she would pull away, very, very quickly and become very unsettled and stuff like that.
So even at that stage, like there was the spiritual component of it to say, oh, wait a minute, something's feeling challenged here, but where it's trying to stake its ownership, like it's trying to come from a position of this is my territory. But then there was also that other side of it where even with us not being physically intimate in marriage at that time, just any kind of too close or the beard was a massive trigger for me that I would react to. So there were really obvious signs there too of sexual abuse that we'd never... it's not like I could go, well, I remember this time or there was this or there was that, but there was really obvious signs of that.
Well, just for clarity and because one of my things with this stuff, it's weird and it's horrific and all of that. And I think this is why so many people, and as you've experienced, when you start hearing a little bit of this, take these steps back. And it's because the things we don't understand, we fear. And that's just a normal human sort of response. But so for the sake of clarity, I would say you shared when you got baptized as a young adult.
Yeah.
And then then you tried to take your life. When you've gone through those systematic abuses that come through satanic ritual abuse, there's actually almost like a programming that's done so that when things like you make a choice for God, it's almost like an alarm bell rings and there's a process that needs to happen. And so it's like a trigger that makes you respond in ways that you wouldn't normally. And as you were saying, I don't even know why I felt so like I wanted to kill myself, but it was just such a driven compulsion.
Yeah.
And those are triggers. And it's the same thing when you started to commit to Kris. It's another trigger because what they have done is they systematically set these things up so that you stay isolated. As you were saying, like I was isolated. I didn't have anyone. And so it keeps you isolated and keeps you in that trauma and keeps you in a place where it's very hard to find healing, to find freedom, and to get past this stuff, which is why your story is so incredible to see, I guess, the determination and resilience to just keep going, even though there's these things like in those early days where you totally didn't understand what was happening, but you kept your faith and you kept going. But just for those listening that have no sort of grid for this sort of thing, that's what's happening. It's not the person's crazy. It's not the person's evil in and of themselves. It's just there are things that are programmed so deeply inside of you that when we make choices for ourselves that are good choices, like getting married and choosing to follow God and be baptized, it sets off these processes in us to keep us from wanting, keep us from for a victim to find freedom and to find healing. So I just wanted to clarify that because I want to demystify some of this stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's important to point that out. I think what we have to remember is that victims of satanic ritual abuse are programmed, as you say, to make it seem like everything is normal so that it looks fine from the outside so that nobody sees what's going on, but also so that the person being abused doesn't remember the abuse and so they can't report it to anyone else. And how they do that is by shattering the personality through abuse, and so that there are different parts, and it's called dissociative identity disorder, and each of the parts kind of has its own memories, but the main part that you then go on in life with doesn't remember those things because it's been dealt with by a different part, which is then hidden away, which sounds really complicated, but that explains why as you were going through life, you knew something was wrong, but you couldn't put your finger on what it exactly was, and then you had all these symptoms of abuse coming up in your life, but you couldn't understand why.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the thing is, our body is set up, our body remembers these things. Even if we're not consciously reminded of it in our brain, our bodies still remember this stuff. And it comes out somewhere. Like you can only cap this to some point. Yes. And that's why there's these little overflows that happen at different times with different situations. And so pretty crazy stuff.
Well, there is actually research on this, and it's surprising, Bronwyn, that you say, people, you're not crazy, and yet trauma survivors, especially survivors of SRA, are treated exactly like that. It's like, well, you're crazy, your story's not believable. If your story is true, well, why not this? And yet it's like the church and counselors and psychologists, it's like up to this point we can handle, if you talk about physical abuse or emotional abuse or sexual abuse, but when you add in the spiritual component, that's a whole different ball game, and you really are painted as crazy and, like you have a mental disorder, whereas I've heard it explained really well that dissociative identity disorder isn't really a mental health issue, it's a coping strategy.
It is, yeah.
Is you split your personality, and in satanic ritual abuse, they intentionally split your personality as well so that they can manipulate your different personalities. But you split your personality to be able to carry the trauma and survive. And research on the brain now says that's what your brain does, is it protects itself and protects your body from the trauma in the sense that you can still carry all of that, but there comes a certain age in your life, usually in your 30s, where that brain barrier that protects your memory starts to break down so that your body starts to remember the memories and your mind starts to piece things together. So it's almost like when you're in a safer space, when you're an adult, when you're more able to rationalize and piece things together, it's almost like your brain forces you to then cope with it. And there's research for that.
And it makes so much sense too, because God created us to be resilient. And as a child, you can't escape the situation that you're in. You're stuck in that situation. And so God created us with ways to be able to handle what comes along and continue on in life. To do that, he gives us these coping mechanisms. But unfortunately, then as we get older, those coping mechanisms can become really toxic and cause damage and difficulties in our lives, as you were experiencing, as you were going through all of that.
Yeah, and from everything I've learned, if we disassociate by the age of 7, you tend to disassociate much more than, like, we can disassociate, like if you've never disassociated and you go through something, they know this now with soldiers, so you send a 25-year-old soldier to the battlefield and, you know, they're healthy and fine, but they go through such a trauma, they can disassociate then, but it doesn't become quite the same mechanism of coping that someone who is as a child has gone through lots of trauma. It becomes their main thing, you know, it becomes their main coping mechanism. And so every time that stress is there, you disassociate again. And so you've got another part. I often, for people to just sort of understand it, it's like taking a plate and dropping it on the ground. Now that plate goes into pieces, but it's still a plate. And the process of healing that we kind of went through, and I often use this metaphor, is it's gluing those pieces back together. It's still a plate, it's just fractured.
Yes.
So it doesn't cease being a plate, it's just in pieces now. And so the process that we go through is bringing those pieces back together to make it whole once again. Just to give you some information and some background, because as I say, I want people to understand this and understand that this is not scary. This is not, it's complex at times, but it's not something beyond what God can do. And we need more of us out there helping people and understanding this stuff and being willing to walk a journey with somebody. I mean, that's a big passion of mine, is that it's not isolated to a certain few, but unfortunately that is the case. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that at some point, but there's not a lot of help out there, and there's not a lot of people who understand the complexities of it or how to bring that healing. The person's not crazy. The person's not evil. The person's not bad. It's just they're fractured, and those fractures come out, and we don't know how to respond to those fractures because they're not a whole person and they're functioning in their trauma. You know, so if you were trying to deal with somebody in the middle of a battlefield, it's going to be really different to somebody that you're sitting across having a coffee in a safe place.
Yeah.
So was it in your 30s that you started to remember?
It was like a lot of what we're talking about, like with, you know, like the spiritual stuff. We weren't together yet. And then when we were together, we were in our late 20s when we first got together. But when my story really broke open was in my 30s. I don't think it was so much that I started to remember. I think there was always little snippets, but it was that it was time. I really believe that there is a season for everything in God, and I think that was my season after all of the crying out to God and feeling like he wasn't coming through for me. I remember we had been married at this stage, finally made it to the wedding after 12 or 14 breaking it off, made it to the wedding, and then we had 3 children at this stage when things started to happen. And I had gone to like a mum's. I had some friends who had children same ages as our children, and I'd gone to like this mum's morning coffee, and another friend of mine was talking about her relationship with God, and she was talking about this conversation she'd had with God and how so much stuff had come out of her conversation with him. And I just went home and put the kids down for a day nap, and Kris was at work, and I just sat there before God and I just went, is that what it's meant to be like? Because I feel like a zombie. I'm just dead inside, like there's nothing. And in saying that, it's not like I wasn't a present wife for my husband and I wasn't a present mum for our kids. I was that. You know, I was there for them, and we'd hang out and spend family time and do all that stuff. But inside of myself, I just said to God, is this it? Is this all there is for me? Because I feel like I'm crying out and crying out and crying out. And I was in church, was saved, was baptized, was spending quiet time with God. And I just felt like there was nothing. And I just said to him, if this is all there is, I don't want it. I'm done. Like, I just can't do this anymore. I've cried out for so long. A few days after that, God woke me up at that horrible hour of the morning. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and woke me up and gave me this scripture. And it was the scripture out of Ezekiel 36 where he talks about the rebuilding of the city. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'll give you a new heart, and that scripture. And, you know, if anybody wants to look that up, or I think I've got it written here.
So a heart of stone to a heart of flesh.
Yeah, like, and it
really
was that
powerful
whole passage is, you know, I'll give you a new heart. I'll rebuild the city. Things that were barren and broken will now become new and flourished and green.
Yeah.
So I wrote that scripture down, and then a few days, and I'm just like, okay, great. I'm big into journaling, Bible and things. And so wrote that down, wrote a few of my thoughts down, and was like, okay, ho-hum, went back to bed. And then a few days later, God woke me up with the passage out of Psalm 51, I think it is, where he talks about clean you with hyssop. Now, if you read that whole passage, there is a verse in there that talks about, in sin my mother conceived me. I wrote down the entire passage that God gave me. When I went back to that months later, I had skipped that verse.
Oh, wow.
About in sin my mother conceived me. Had written the entire passage except that verse.
Yep.
And when you learn my story, you kind of go, "Ooh!" Like that was a very ingrained subconscious, like, oh, I can't face that right now. And it was not long after that, our entire world just, I would say exploded, but kind of imploded, because we kept it kind of to ourselves and still had to function in this life we had as this happily married couple raising 3 kids, like, but our whole world pretty much fell apart at that stage. It was at that time I had gone to a women's group, and Beth Moore, they had played a Beth Moore video where she had talked about her own personal journey and how she had been asked by this person to come and sit and do ministry with them, and she felt like God said no, but she went and did it anyway. Because she's like, it's not that big a deal. I'll just go do ministry with them. I don't know what God's saying no for, kind of thing. She just kind of justified it to herself. Maybe that's not God, it's me. She went and did this ministry with this woman, and this woman started sharing her personal testimony, and Beth Moore sat there and she said all of a sudden it's just like everything started to crumble, and she started to remember her own childhood with abuse in it. She had to leave, excuse herself from the ministry session with this woman, and had to call somebody else in to come and help. And Beth Moore said, at that point, I just knew that things were going down, like God was wanting to do business with me. And she made this statement, and she said, God will turn you upside down and inside out to make your life completely his. And I hopped up, and I just remember thinking, and I was like, oh, crap, this is it. And I had no idea why, but I just felt like God had just put his thumb on me out of nowhere. Like, at this stage, I was still functioning okay. I'd had those 2 Bible passages, but was still fairly numb to life. And when I hopped up and left, as I was leaving, I could just see within myself, it's like I was dressed as the figure. I was walking, and I was dressed in jeans and a T-shirt, but as I was walking, I could see myself wearing this black cloak and these long, sharp, black hands with nails scraping up both of my arms as I left the meeting that day. And then it was just after that our pastor's wife came and saw me, because our children had all been sick.
And one of our biggest struggles has always been, and we kind of joke about it, is basically Leah looks too normal. Like, if she
was covered in tattoos.
Yeah, like I said, look, you really need to look like a prostitute. You really need to be...
Because that's what people expect if you've suffered that degree of trauma.
You need to come in and look like you've been on a bender for the last 4 days. You need to have a cigarette. You need to smell of alcohol. You need
be covered in
tattoos,
jewelry and rings.
And I need to, giving you a shiner or something. And I need, and the kids need to look disheveled and they haven't eaten for... We looked like your Christmas card, whether you want to say like Christian family, but there was a husband, there was a wife. We showed public signs of affection.
We were serving in the church. We were serving quite extensively in the church.
and our kids were growing up, and our kids were in.
We had groups of friends that we interacted with regularly. Like, we looked normal. We seemed normal.
Cookie cutter Christian family.
So when you say your life fell apart, what happened?
Well, what happened was at that point, and this all happened within a period of a week or two, like, you know, where I'd gone home and had said to God, I can't do this, I'm done. Like, I can't live my life feeling like I'm numb. And then the 2 Bible verses, and then I went to this women's meeting, and then it was a day or so after that the pastor's wife came and said to me, I feel like we need to come and pray in your house. I was like, you don't have to do that. She's like, no, I really feel like, you know, her husband was the campus pastor. I feel like we need to come to your house and pray. And I was like, okay, well, whatever. This is the day that Kris is home from work. And
the kids had been sick for a number of days. She never really said why, but Leah came home.
She just felt strongly to come.
Yeah. She came up to me today at the end of the session and said, you know, we're coming over. And
so the closer we got to that was only days away. Like, she had said, we're coming over, and this was days away from when they were coming. So the closer it got to that time, I knew that our 2 older kids would be in school. The only one home was our baby and us 2. The closer it came, the more I could feel this anxiety in me rising.
Agitation.
Like, just this, I can't do this, and I just said to Kris, they can come, but I'm not going to be here. Like, they can come, and at that stage it was the Sunday. I said, they can come tomorrow, but I'm not going to be here.
She was pacing
and
back
he's
and
like,
forth.
well, what do you mean? Like, they're coming to pray for our kids and our family. Why are you not going to be here? I'm like, I can't be here. And he's like, no, you have to stay. I'm like, I have to leave. Like, he's like, no, you're staying. And by the time they got there, I was almost in a comatose state on the sofa. I was not functioning. I was not talking. I was just rugged up in the corner of the sofa, unable to talk by the time they arrived. Our pastor and his wife came with 2 people from their prayer ministry team, came into the house, and I was aware of them, and I was aware of him kind of going to Kris like Kris is like, I don't know.
What's going on with this lady?
I don't know what's happening, because I couldn't even talk to them when they walked into the house.
He didn't make that big of it. He did take note of it, but he didn't make that big of a deal of it. I think he always addressed you, and I do remember him addressing you. You know, like, hello, Leah. You didn't respond, but he, you know, went on about, I was going to say his business, but obviously God's. They had a plan.
They did.
And they started.
And he said, like, I remember him saying, because I was aware of what was happening, and he said, we're just going to walk through and we're going to pray. And so he did that. He walked through
room to room,
started praying. And we didn't have a big house. Like, we were at one end of the hallway in our room, and the kids' rooms were at the other. And I remember him coming back and saying to Kris, there's a presence that walks this hallway. Kris is like, huh? Like, what? And he's like, yeah, there is a dark presence that walks this hallway every night between your kids' bedrooms and your bedroom. Kris is like, okay. Well, our kids kind of had said a few things, and our children are very perceptive, very aware, have all very unique spiritual giftings. And we have one particular child who at that stage was 4, who would talk about a presence that would come in the hallway and rake its big, long black fingernails down the wall. And he would talk about how it would bring 2 others. We had like 3 kids.
Yeah, the hallway wall, like this oval of light, or like a, you know, whether you want to say like a portal. And we had not shared. I was very careful. Leah was very careful not to share any of this stuff, what was going on with the children or anything like that. We were very private, and we kept it away from them.
And at this stage, there wasn't a lot happening. It was just, there were a few indicators that things were there.
But yeah, this thing in like 3 things in black cloaks with no feet.
Yeah, it would just float. He would explain it like they would just float along the floor, like they had no feet.
Come into his room, and he would hide under the covers and be absolutely terrified. But this was almost a normal nightly event for him. Like, he spoke, it rained last night. And
and he would acknowledge its existence. He said it would acknowledge his existence, but it would just kind of look at him but not interact with him really. So we were aware stuff, but we just kind of prayed and did what we knew to do and comforted him.
And didn't really realise the significance the connections, the importance sort of thing.
Because at this stage we knew nothing. We knew nothing about my childhood other than the few things I said that, seemed normal to us growing up. But our pastor went, I'm just going to pray up and down this hallway because I kind of sensed this figure. And he walked the hallway and he's speaking in English. Absolutely nothing happened. And all of a sudden he started speaking in tongues. And oh my gosh, to say all hell broke loose is an understatement. I went from comatose on the sofa to kicking out a full glass window that was beside me on the sofa and just completely lost it. And they're all like...
Because we were all in the hallway completely, we couldn't see the lounge room or anything. And so he started praying in tongues. He had 2 South African women from their prayer team, and they were praying anyway. So we hear this loud crash and this glass and come out, and there's glass everywhere, all over the lounge chair, like Leah's lying in it. It's all over the floor. It didn't shatter to me, glass is supposed to shatter into like the little cubes so you don't get cut. This was big, jagged shards and like that you could hold in your hand and everything in between. Like it was the worst kind of breakage. And then we proceeded to basically lay hands on Leah and roll around in broken glass.
And I just want to make this point here, because one of the things we've really learnt in our journey with you guys is deliverance is mostly a quiet, peaceful experience when it's done well. And at this point, I think everybody was so in shock. I mean, I wasn't in shock. I totally was, this is me. Like I was totally, here I am.
Beast mode.
Because this thing in me had been exposed and there was no backing down from that. Now that it had been exposed, it was fully ready to play, even though we had no idea what it was. It's the fact that it had been exposed, it had been seen and it had been challenged really at that point. Everybody was like, it's like, we don't know what to do here. So our pastor kind of went to a call for backup as to what do I do. And these 2 women, their idea of deliverance was the louder you yell and the harder you hit, the more effective it is.
Hence my comment on like the heavy Bible.
Yeah,
Okay.
The thicker, heavier Bible, that puts more pressure on the demons and it squeezes them out of you.
So in the midst of that, there was this demonic presence that was, okay, I'm ready for a fight.
Manifesting.
I'm here now, let's do this. But there was this me behind all of that. Was me who was like, okay, but I'm here too. And as we go,
no voice
whatsoever. Because as we go through, you'll find out like my core, that underneath that thing was my core identity who had been hidden from the age of 3. So you had this thing which was ready for a fight, but behind that you had this 3-year-old core identity who is at 3 such a baby, who was like, here I am too. This is me here too. And was then faced with these 2 women hitting me in the stomach, punching me in the stomach and yelling.
Forcing it out. That's like, again, that's, you've
punch
got to
and-
force it out.
and
Got to
yelling,
force it out.
yelling at me.
Wow.
Yelling for this
I'm
thing
so
to
sorry
go.
that happened.
It was horrid. It was
That
horrid.
was the start of many.
Yeah, it was full on. But then, to our campus pastor's credit, he came back and with everything else that has happened after that and the pain that was caused in our church afterwards, at that point, our campus pastor came and sat in the glass beside me on the sofa, and I just knew he saw that little girl. He saw that core identity because he leaned right in, even in the midst of the glass and my temperament. And I was told at one stage I attempted to stab him with the glass. So even in the midst of that, he leaned in and he spoke right to that 3-year-old part of me who was stuck in there and was the very first heart of Jesus that I'd ever seen.
From a man.
Well, from anybody really. I grew up in, that lady when I was growing up. Yeah. But absolutely the very first heart of Jesus that I'd seen that showed compassion and care.
Loved her like Jesus loved.
And saw through, like he saw through the darkness and saw through the trauma of it all and saw me and spoke to me for who I was and not for the chaos that was swirling in the midst of all of that.
All the distraction, the noise.
What did he say to you?
I can't even fully remember what he said, but it was just like, I think it was something like, I'm here, like we're going to, that's what he said. He said, I'm here and we don't understand, but we're going to work this out.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a voice of hope.
Yeah, like it was, we don't know what's happening right now because, and they did later say exactly that. We seemed to be a normal couple and they thought they were just coming in to pray because our kids were sick. And then they got hit with this. They had little experience in that field for a start, probably much like you guys in your first experience.
Yeah.
They had little experience. They'd never really fully had to deal with that, and especially not at that level from a family that they wouldn't expect it from. So for him to just go, this is going to be okay. Yeah, like it just was for him to do that. And I will always, always love him for that because for the longest time after that, he was the example of Jesus that I looked to, even in the horror of learning what my childhood was. You know, the story of the shepherd's voice and how the sheep hear him. Because all of my experience of Jesus and God had been built on torture and abuse and trauma.
And men and
like it had
men
all
in
been
authority, men in any
power,
kind of
control.
Yes. Exactly. So my experience, and it was wrong. I mean, they intentionally do it that way in Satanism, so you get the wrong impression of Jesus and God, so you never find your way back to them. So my only experience of Jesus and God was trauma and horror and betrayal and all of that. So to have somebody come in and see me and go, we're gonna figure this out, I learnt to see him as Jesus first. He was my example, and I listened for his voice. So in the absence of me deeply knowing Jesus and God and deeply trusting them, he was my stepping stone to them because here was somebody I trusted. Here was somebody I could listen for him. And when he spoke, I actually really heard him. He would cut through all the noise and I could listen and follow instructions from him because he represented safety for me.
I remember a time, it was after a few sessions with him and his wife, and I can't remember what started it, but basically Leah said, he's the first man or the first representation, but I think she said man, to love me like Jesus. And she said, you and I can't have that. You can't be that for me because you're my husband, just through the indoctrination that she had with, the husband being the head of the house and all that kind of thing. He loves me like Jesus in that you and I have a sexual nature to our relationship, so I will always defer back to that, like, Kris is treating me like this because he wants sex, or he's doing this because he wants to have sex, or whatever. Because
that's what that in the occult, was my purpose. My purpose was to meet those needs for people.
Her value and worth
that was part
as
of
a
it.
Sexual object. Your only worth, your only value is
what you offer, either in a sexual nature or through your spiritual giftings or however we can use you.
So, I could not represent that side of, yes, I could be caring, yes, I could be protective, yes, I could be a provider, but I could not love her like Jesus loved the woman at the well, like Jesus loved the woman with the issue of blood, like Jesus loved the woman caught in the act of adultery. I could not love her like that because in each of those cases where he loved those women, he loved them, he showed them love and compassion and grace and acceptance in that moment, in their very situation, in the very act of being caught in adultery, in the very act of I'm on my seventh husband and it's not really a big deal, in the very act of I have been filthy with the woman with the issue of blood, I have been dirty or unclean, that's the word I was looking for. I have been unclean for 20 years to the point where I cannot be accepted by my family. He loved them right then and there without expectation of, I'm going to give you this love what are you going to give me? So I couldn't express that to her. And I will always be so grateful for his heart and his attitude in this, is that he did. He expressed that knowingly, unknowingly, he just expressed that, and she just responded to that. I mean, it went just time and time again in later sessions that would be called on or that would be used, and he would be able to show that heart, and she would respond to that and come back.
So for other sessions, because other prayer ministry people were called in and they all botched it horrendously, and even being aware that they had no idea what they were facing, like they refused to listen to what I was saying, because in this I had some internal awareness and I was just clinging so tightly onto God. I was asking God, okay, what's going on? Talk to me, like give me something, because he was all I could cling to. So in me saying, look, I think this is happening, or I think this is what God's saying. So even in that, the prayer ministry people wouldn't listen to me because they thought they knew better. They thought that, they were trained and they heard from God better. So
they had their checklists.
Yeah, they had their checklists and, this is what we're going to do. So even when they would step in and botch it really badly and I would react, like I remember not long after that, we were desperate. Like I was in trouble. Life exploded from that point. What do you do when that's happened and the demonic really just starts to let itself be known? Like I remember I would stand after that day, they all went away and I was left raising 3 babies at home alone, and one of
them with very severe food allergies.
Yeah, like anaphylactic
husband who worked
allergies.
Shift work, so he was away 14 hours a day, a night.
And I remember I would stand in my kitchen preparing food for our babies, and my demonic guardian would be standing beside me at the bench, just right there beside me. I could touch it. And I would talk to it and go, tell me why you're here. Why are you here? Like, what is your purpose? And it didn't have to answer me. And when it felt like responding, it would. But most of the time it didn't. It would just ignore me because it had a legal authority to stay, didn't have to engage with me. And I couldn't get rid of it. It stayed. So,
I remember the Guardian very clearly. And tell you what, before we get into the Guardian,
yes,
let's take a little break. I'm going to be really mean, and we're going to end this episode. So if you're listening and you want to know about the Guardian, you're going to have to listen next week. So we'll take a pause there, and we'll pick it up again here shortly. You've been listening to the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. Thanks for joining us again today. We really appreciate you guys listening, and we just pray that you have a blessed and lovely day.